Thanks everyone for coming tonight to the first of our GIER Twilight seminars for 2019. So before we start, I'd of course like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting and pay respects to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So before we start tonight, our team has, we thought we'd put this up here because we know you're all interested in the autism research that we're doing over at the Autism Centre of Excellence, and earlier on this year we got a government grant to look at anxiety and autism in young children and help reduce the impact of anxiety on young children transitioning into school, which is fantastic. I think it's really nice that the powers that be at the top of the funding tree have shown an interest in autism and anxiety. And a small plug that we will be looking for parents later on in the year to help us pilot some materials before we do the full trial. So if you know any parents of 5 to 6 year old children who might be interested, just drop me an email, and then when it comes to it, I'll email the information. It's not saying you want to do it, but we just want to make sure we get the opportunity out to parents from all sorts of backgrounds with all sorts of experiences. Or it will go up on our Facebook page, which hopefully most of you are already following. So we've got two presenters tonight. We're going to start with Dr. Megan Clark, who has joined us at the end of last year from Melbourne, from the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre. So we were really pleased that she joined our team and brought her skills up. And since joining us, she's been leading work on resilience. So what helps children when they're going through the difficult times, and also their positive perceptions of herself and how that links to their well-being. And then we'll have Professor Jackie Roberts, who most of you know by now, because Jackie's been in our team since nearly the beginning. And Jackie's going to talk on strengths and skills and special interests. And Jackie's working with colleagues from Aspect and down in Sydney and indeed the UK on a big grant to look at strengths and special interests and skills and how they could be used to help improve outcomes for children on the spectrum. So we'll go through Megan's presentation and then Jackie's, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions afterwards. So I'll hand over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks all for being here this afternoon. And it's really great to be able to stand up here and talk to you about the strengths and positive attributes of children on the autism spectrum. To start tonight's presentation, I want to ask you guys to have a little think for about 30 seconds. What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Just think to yourselves, the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of autism. What is that? What is the first thought that you have? Often we associate the difficulties and challenges that come along with autism. When we think about difficulties, we look at difficulties in the communication, socialisation, self-care difficulties, also problems with independence, both for children and for adults. In regards to development, and for the teachers in the room, when we're looking at development, we often are aware of the developmental delays that can come along with autism, as well as the language delays, and both of those can affect a child or an adult's ability to communicate. And we often compare how children are going relative to their same age peers. Are they on track? Are they experiencing more difficulties? Social challenges are often around understanding others' emotions, understanding other people's thought processes and that perspective taking. And that can really impact on individuals' ability to maintain those relationships or engage in relationships with peers. And it's often the communication difficulties that really result in a lot or cause a lot of these behavioural manifestations that we see in those challenging behaviours. Other diagnoses that often go along with autism include anxiety. We know children are 6 times more likely to have anxiety if they're on the spectrum compared to their peers. Depression is also very prevalent, as is ADHD and intellectual disability. Now, having worked in the space of diagnosis in Melbourne, I have been one that's looking at these challenges. I have a child present to me and I would look at how is this child going? Where are the areas of difficulty for that child? And that's that information then that gives me enough basis to make a diagnosis if appropriate. So I do recognise that these challenges do have a place. However, when we focus too heavily on these challenges, we're not giving individuals on the spectrum enough, or we're not leaving enough room to really focus on the positive attributes that these individuals have to offer. So we need to remember that individuals with autism, they're not just a collection of their difficulties. We need to consider what they have in terms of those strengths and those positive assets as well. So let's then consider the positive attributes. How do we measure these positive skills, and how do we look at strengths? As a researcher, I will admit that we're not very good at doing this, and we do have some work to do in this area. We were interested in looking at the positive attributes of children at school, aged between 6 and 8 years, and we did so by asking them the following 3 questions. What are you absolutely best at? What do you like most about yourself? And what do you enjoy doing? And these questions were designed to give us insight into how children perceive themselves, also what their interests are, and what are the qualities that they like about themselves. I'll go through each of these questions with you in turn and share some of their responses with you. Starting with question 1, what are you absolutely best at? Now you'll see up here that while I haven't presented all of the themes, these are some of the themes here presented in red. And within each of those themes, we've got some of the children's responses. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of children's verbatim responses with you guys today. So we can see that academic areas were an area that children identified they were best at. Particularly math, science and engineering came through as the most common areas that children identified as strength. Technology and gaming included a range of technology, electronics, iPad, video games. That was something that they identified as being best at. Socialising was a really nice theme that came through, and this involved things like I like arranging things for my friends and I to do together. I love making mum laugh, and that went on to say with my funny facial expressions. Being friendly, so that's really encouraging to see those responses there. Sports and physical activities made up their own theme, and these range from dancing and running to swimming, cartwheels and soccer. And creativity was expressed through a theme, instruments and music. And this ranged from playing music to reading music and singing along to music. When asked what do you enjoy most, again, technology and gaming emerged as a common theme. And this included coding, watching YouTube, playing video games, and other sorts of technology and electronics. Activities and hobbies ranged from gardening and reading to card and board games, as well as listening to music and singing. Another social theme came through here, social interaction and social play. And this involved talking and spending time with friends and family. Physical activities again made an appearance here with walking, swimming, horse riding and bodyboarding. Also want to draw your attention to alone time, which was its own theme. And that involved 2 responses, going to places on my own and being alone when I feel like it. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. What do you like best about yourself? A good person or friend to be around was a common theme here. And this involved or included responses that I'm nice, I'm caring towards other people, I have a big heart. So all of these really lovely qualities. Being good at particular things was its own theme. And this was around skills and knowledge, often in particular areas. So for example, I've got up here my skills at soccer. Another child said their ability to soak up information. So that's generally related to an area of interest or a specific topic. Unique qualities were great to see. So children were identifying that yes, they were unique, but it wasn't in a bad way. It was that they enjoyed that they were unique, that they liked, that they were a bit different. One child said, I'm a geek and I'm okay with that. Another child identified that it was their autism that they liked the best about themselves. So that's really empowering to see that a child is identifying that their autism is a part of them and it's something that they're proud of. So that's really great to see. Other personal qualities around being intelligent, successful or hardworking were also coded in a separate theme. Now when we look at each of these questions, we'll go back to question 1. We can see here that there's a social thread that runs through each of these questions. So starting with question 1, what are you best at? Socialising was a common theme. We go back to question 3, a good person or friend to be around. And back to question 2, social interaction and social play. Now, why that's interesting is that it really challenges some of those difficulties that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, particularly those difficulties around communication, necessary for social interaction, and also those social difficulties that we often associate with autism. But what these responses are telling us is that children with autism might in fact have different social needs to other children. So I feel as though that's really captured by this theme, alone time. Now we can see that there have been some social responses to each of these questions. So it's demonstrating that children enjoy social interaction. They like being with friends and other people and their family. They enjoy that aspect of their lives. But they're also saying that they might need some respite from that social interaction as well. So as teachers and as parents and as researchers, we might observe social interaction in the playgrounds and we might say, well, a child that doesn't have autism might be happy to spend the entirety of recess or lunch engaged in those social interactions. For children with autism, it might be that they want to spend a proportion of that time with their friends, but they also might need some time alone. They might need some downtime away from that social interaction, and they're telling us that that's what they want. So this is why this sort of activity is so valuable for us to do. And why is this an important activity for children on the autism spectrum to do? It's an activity that encourages them to reflect on their positive attributes. And not only the reflection, we're also encouraging them to communicate what they're good at, what they like about themselves. And both of these skills will help with the development of their self-concept. And the research tells us that self-concept is an area that can be quite difficult for children with autism. So this is a way of really encouraging children to get involved with such an activity that will really facilitate that self-concept and that awareness and that insight into themselves to develop further. So parents in the room, you can take away from this the following activity that we've done, and you can sit with your child at home and you can ask them to write or draw a response to the following 3 questions that we've just talked about. What do you like most about yourself? What do you enjoy most? And what are you best at? Teachers, you can also do the same with your students. You can do this at the end of a term in preparation for the following term, or you can do it as an activity at the start of the term to get to know your students better. And parents, this is really important for you guys because you can then be that person that reminds your child of what their strengths are. You might want to create a board of strengths in the home. Now, this is a really blank slate, but it's up there as a representation of something that you could do. So what could this include? If you've done this activity with your child and they say to you, I really loved gardening, gardening was an interest, or I'm really good, a strength of mine is building things with Lego, I'm really good at Lego. You might want to take a photo of something that they've built with Lego, something that they've done in the garden, and that then goes onto the board. And you start to then build a collection of the things that represent these positive attributes. You might want to have a record of success of things that they've done at home. For younger kids, it might be that they've stayed in the bed through the night and not got up several times. It might be that they've helped out with a chore, they've kept their room tidy. It could be a record of a success or an achievement at school, an area of academic strength that they have. You might want to attach that to the board. Involve the family in this process, have the siblings involved, have parents involved, have grandma involved. Because what that's then communicating to your child is that other people in the family are also recognising these strengths that I have. And that's a really powerful thing. This can then be used as a visual representation and something that you can use on those bad days, those days where your child might be feeling anxious and finding it difficult then to identify things that they like about themselves or that they're good at. And unlike a reinforcement system, a token economy type system, where things might be added for good behaviour or things might be removed when a child's had a bad day or done something wrong, it's really important that this stays as it is. Yes, you can continue to add to the board, but it's really important not to deduct things from this board of strengths, because you don't want to communicate to your child that on a good day your strengths are there, but when you've done something wrong, it might affect how good you are at certain things. So it's really important that that stays as it is. We might want to think about praising and reinforcing strengths. So, how does my child respond to praise? In my experience with working with children, some children don't respond particularly well to verbal praise. It might actually make them feel uncomfortable, and then that's going to have the opposite effect of what you're wanting to achieve. If verbal praise doesn't suit your child, you might want to try a high five. Some kids that I've worked with love a high five. After doing a cognitive assessment, every time they got a correct answer or had done a task, high five. If they don't like physical touch, you might want to write them a letter. It could be, I saw that you did this, or your teacher told me you did this at school today. I'm really proud of you, great work, and give that child your letter. You might want to put these letters in a little communication book so you can keep a log of the records of success and that affirmation of strengths. Or you're probably more familiar with your typical token economy systems, stickers, reward, chart, whatever that might look like. You could also open up a dialogue and ask your child how they would like to be encouraged, and that's something that you can also do as well. Why is this important for teachers? It helps you learn about your students in more depth. What interests them, what motivates them, and what are they good at? Now, often as researchers and also as teachers, you would be familiar with standardised assessments, and they're used to give you an idea of where that student is performing, how are they going relative to same-age peers, and from there you might think that you've got a pretty good idea of where their strengths lie, what they're good at. However, we need to remember that not all strengths and positive attributes can be captured by these standardised measures. So doing this activity with them is providing them an opportunity to really maybe show you things that they are good at that you weren't aware of, that can't be captured by these measures. And you can use this information to really guide your lesson planning moving forward. It can help you to inform the way you deliver activities that really align with those strengths. And you will then be aware of what their motivations are as well. And this can help you with reinforcing the strengths. Now, for us to properly understand strengths, we need to also understand what's supporting a child using their strengths and what's making it difficult for that child. What's a barrier that might be preventing the use of strengths? So we asked parents the following two questions. What makes it easy for your child with autism to use their strengths at home, at school and in the community? And what makes it hard for them to use their strengths in these same environments? Parents identified that for children, support and encouragement was really a big facilitator of strengths for them in the home environment. So we talked a bit before about praise. So it really reiterates the importance of finding a way to encourage your child that suits them. Intervention as well, so ongoing support, whether that's speech, OT, sessions with the psychologist, they were all really encouraging children to use their strengths at home. Conflict in the house, so fighting, whether it was with siblings, with parents, a lack of routine. Time pressures was an interesting one, and that came up quite a lot because parents were saying, we don't have time to encourage the use of strengths, or we're so busy that we're always rushing from one activity to another. So we don't allow enough time for that creativity to come through, or whatever that might look like. And too many distractions around the house as well was also another barrier. At school, small class sizes were really important for children. And a teacher knowing that student's strengths, that was a really big one that came through as well. So that's why this activity we've spoken about, that could really benefit you teachers in the room. Giving them a choice in activities as well was something that encouraged them to use those strengths. On the flip side of a small class, a big or noisy class, that was something that made it difficult for students. Anxiety at school, and we know that anxiety is a big one for children with autism. Lots of changes in the room, changes in schedule, different teacher, change in expectations, that made it difficult, as did a lack of support, so children not feeling that they had adequate support at school. Within the community, inclusive activities, creating a safe environment was really important for children. Respect from others and support from others to really encourage children to use those strengths. Again, a noisy or overstimulating environment. Communication, so that could be other people not necessarily understanding or communicating in an effective way, or just communication being a barrier there. A lack of understanding from others within the community, not understanding autism, not understanding maybe some of the difficulties, and children feeling overwhelmed. They made it difficult for them to use those strengths. Teachers, you might want to have a think about a student in your class that has autism. Have a think about something that makes it difficult for them to use those strengths. What are some of those barriers that you can think of? If it's around confidence, you might want to use the easy task sandwich. So starting with something, you know what their strengths are now that you've done this activity. You can have a good idea of starting with something that's easier for them, working your way up to that difficult task, and then again finishing with something that's a bit easier to finish on a positive note. If it's around boredom, giving students the choice, you might say, okay, today I want them, it's non-negotiable that we have to get through these 3 activities, but the order of the activities isn't important. So have the student involved in that choice of activities. If it's around motivation, that's where that interest-based learning is really important, and building those interests into the curriculum. If it's around anxiety, it could be around performance anxiety, not wanting to give something a go, fear of failure. It could be worth first identifying what the trigger of that anxiety is. So this could be enough to just work with the child, or you might also want to work with the parents. And once you've identified those triggers, you can start to put some supports in place to really manage that anxiety. Because it could be that anxiety is actually masking some of the strengths, and it's that difficulty that's really stopping that student from showing their full capacity. And remember, strengths should only be used to encourage a child. Now, what I mean by this is, probably we've all been here where, despite good intentions, we might know that a child's really good at maths, for example. And we might notice that they're not doing their maths. And we might go up and say, well, Sam, but you're really good at maths. Why aren't you doing your maths today? While that might be in an effort to acknowledge or encourage a strength, it might actually have the opposite effect. So it might then be an indicator. So maybe use that as a barometer to go, okay, well, the child's not engaging in something that I know that they're good at. So does that mean that something's going on internally for that child that I can't see? Are they feeling anxious? Are they feeling stressed or unwell? And then step back and think about, reflect on, maybe observe what's happening, and then maybe open up a dialogue to check in with the child, see if they're okay. I wanted to finish with this quote, which I thought really sums it up quite nicely. Their gifts may mask their disabilities, and their disabilities may mask their gifts. So I think that's a really nice one to reflect on, and a good segue to lead into Professor Jackie Ross. Thank you.
It's lovely to see so many people here tonight. I think really vindicates for us the direction that we're taking at ACE at the moment, really focusing on a more positive approach to disability and to autism. My name's Jackie Roberts from the Autism Centre of Excellence. We have been involved in quite a few of these Twilight presentations before, and some of you might have heard me talk before, but hopefully this is a relatively new topic for me, and something that we're very excited about. Just following on from Megan's presentation, I think one of the things that comes across very clearly is the fact that there's such huge variability in the autism population. If you recall the sort of diagram she showed of all the different areas that are affected by autism, the various characteristics of autism, you can see how it's possible for one child with autism to be very different from another. And so it's essential that we do consider that variability and look at developing an individualised approach for children with autism. Historically in the past, as Megan pointed out, we've had very much a deficit-focused approach. So we've really looked at all the things that children can't do. And if you look at the sort of diagnostic tools that are used, if you look at the research that's being done, you'll find there is that very strong deficit focus, that very strong focus on what children with autism, people with autism can't do, and what we can do to fix that up and make them normal, whatever that might be. So that is something that we've seen a very sort of marked shift in emphasis lately towards a much more positive, strengths-based approach. So that very much was reflected in Megan's talk, that need to look at some of the positive aspects of autism for a whole variety of reasons. Not the least being the fact that we know, for example, in schools, educational outcomes for students with autism are not particularly good. And we know that if we can focus on some of these things that the students are good at and develop them, then that's going to have the potential for much greater post-school success. So there's a whole range of reasons why it's important that we do focus on strengths and skills and abilities a bit more. Now, before I move on from this first slide, I'd like to acknowledge Tim Sharp, who's a young man with autism from Brisbane, and Tim's an artist, and this is a painting that was commissioned by Griffith University for the Autism Centre of Excellence, and so Tim has his superhero graduating from university there, Laserbeak Man. People familiar with Tim's work? Yes. It's great, and we're delighted to have that painting up in our offices. So, in this talk, what I want to concentrate on are those exceptional skills and abilities and strengths that we see in autism. There are a few terms that are being used, which I think would be useful to explore so that we're familiar with what they mean. And another thing that's come through with this particular work that we're doing at the moment is working with the gifted and talented area in education as well. So I'll tell you a bit more about that as we go along. But it's important that we look at the way that gifts and talents have been fostered and worked with more generally, and what we've been doing is looking at how we can apply that to the population, the autistic population. You might have heard the term twice exceptional. This is getting used increasingly, and essentially it refers to children or people who have a diagnosed disability or a condition such as autism, and also have gifted and talented in a particular area. So there's that twice exceptionality. So you've got the gifts and talents on one side, and you've got a diagnosed disability on the other. Autism is just one condition that comes up with twice exceptional. ADHD is another, for example, or intellectual disability. So that's certainly now informing a lot of the work that we're looking at in this particular project. When it comes to the autistic population, there are other terms too that are commonly used. So, for example, we have we've been looking at relative strengths. So, Megan focused quite a bit on talking to parents and talking to children themselves about what they're particularly good at, and we also have included that in this work. So, we're looking at those relative strengths. We're also looking at exceptional skills and abilities such as splinter skills. Splinter skills is a term that usually refers to things that an individual is good at relative to the rest of their profile. So they might, they might have a particular ability in, let's say a sport, or particularly, good at, for example, hyperlexia. So they've got that splinter skill, which is much better developed in relation to the rest of their profile, but is not exceptional when you look at the typical population. And then we also have the term savant skill, which is where we have a skill or ability that is exceptional looking across everybody. So it's an exceptional skill or ability that people have that is way more advanced in development than you would find in the typical population. And of course, those are the sort of skills that people find fascinating, and we will talk about some of the better known examples of that. It's important too, though, to understand that those savant skills. Now, the term savant too is sometimes seen as a bit loaded because it has been in the past associated with, for example, the term idiot savant. So some people are not comfortable using the term savant skills or savant abilities. Generally, we refer to exceptional skills and abilities rather than use the term savant skills, but you will come across it quite a bit. So having said all of that, we think that there's certainly the majority of people with autism have relative strengths. And that really goes with having an uneven profile of skills and abilities. We think probably about 30% of people with autism have exceptional skills and abilities, including those splinter skills and the savant skills. So I've popped the definition up there of 2E, exceptional, twice exceptional. And you can see there it clearly states people who have that potential for high achievement or creative productivity in areas such as maths, science, technology, social arts, visual skills, spatial or performing arts, and other areas of human productivity. Memory is also one that comes up quite often. But who also have a diagnosed disability, as defined by various criteria. So those are things like autism, ADHD, attention deficit disorder. And as interestingly enough, Megan finished her talk on basically the same quotation there. Their gifts may mask their disabilities, and their disabilities may mask their gifts. I think too that certainly the application of the medical model, and as Megan pointed out, still predominantly in diagnosis and assessment, it is a deficit-focused approach, and we just don't see that systematic identification of strengths and abilities. So this is something that we would like to see changed. So we are really missing out on those gifts and those abilities a lot of the time because we just don't recognise them. So what we're going to talk about is exactly that. So we're going to talk about identification and understanding of those different skills and abilities. And there is quite a lot of It's not necessarily clear cut. There's there's quite a lot of sort of grey areas and discussion about definitions and things that are necessary. And I'll talk to you a bit about a pilot that we did as part of this project, which shows that people's understanding, parents and teachers' understanding and professionals generally of skills and abilities is quite variable. And in one child we will have different understandings from their parents as compared to their teachers. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about assessing those skills and abilities, and a part of the project we've developed a survey that we've used in the pilot project to identify the different exceptional skills and abilities, and then also talk about the work that we're putting together to propose for an ARC grant, a government grant, looking at how we develop those skills and abilities. So as I mentioned, the way that we think about disability, or the ways that we conceptualise a disability, have typically been from that deficit point of view. So very much, I think that's been pretty much covered by Megan's talk. And you'll see there too the fact that the majority of research in the area is also deficit focused. So we see that very much there with majority of research, 50% focus on deficits with 38% mixed and 11% strengths based. So when you look at the research through this lens, that's what it tells you. And also too, again touched on in Megan's talk, that we do have the aspects of self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we have low expectations of children with disabilities, particularly students with autism, we do find that they internalise those messages and take that on board. One of the things that is very important, I think, about focusing on skills and abilities, and again Megan mentioned it, was the building of the self-esteem of the kids. And this is something that I'm good at. This is a really positive thing. So, looking though at some work from of Patricia Howland, who's also on the team of this project, finding that very few adults with autism are actually able to capitalise on or utilise their special skills and abilities. She found in our survey only 5 of 37 have been able to use that skill to find employment. So that's something that I think is a real challenge. That's something that we want to look at ways to change. We know that we tend to have a rather deficit focus when it comes to the goals that we set for kids, and these are some examples, real examples from teachers' programs for children with autism. And you can see there that very much that deficit focus. One that particularly troubles me is the last one there, Jane will not repeat questions when asked by the teacher in class, which does indicate the teacher has no understanding of echolalia and how important that can be for kids with autism, helping them to understand what's being said. But so this is very much this informed by this deficit focus. Okay, so thinking about exceptional skills and abilities, or savant skills, just thinking about how these usually manifest in the autism population. Now, it is a fascinating area, and I'm sure that many of you will have read accounts or some of the people that we're going to talk about now. But essentially, the areas that are usually implicated or usually involved with the development of special, very exceptional skills and abilities are aspects of memory. One of the things we found with the pilot that we did was memory was the most common well-developed skill of the students that were surveyed in the pilot. So we had over 100 students, and memory was by far and away the most powerful one. Now, this was a memory for past events and people. It can be extraordinary, remembering that Nana had a particular pair of earrings on at lunch 3 years ago on a particular day. So certainly memory. Art is another area that's well developed. Tim Sharp would be a good example of well-developed artistic skills, but we will talk a little bit about Stephen Wiltshire in a minute, who's another person with extraordinary art ability. Hyperlexia is the phenomenon that we do see quite often in small children with autism who teach themselves to read without any formal education, formal instruction. Although what we do find is that what they learn, or what they're able to do, is actual decoding of the words, word recognition and decoding. But when we assess them, we find that the understanding of those words is often not there. But when we see that development in a young child, it's usually referred to as hyperlexia. I had a little boy in a class that I was teaching once who was 4.5, and he'd never said anything at school at all. We never heard him speak. And the first thing he said was, when we were out in the shopping centre one day, "Danger, men at work." And he was reading a sign on the pavement, and it was just amazing. Like, we all just did he speak, and that's what he said. That was it for quite a while. And then we got into we were in the toilets actually, and he said, "Vacant." His mum had said that he said words at home, and we sort of thought, probably didn't, because we never heard them. We should listen to parents more. But he has gone on, that little boy has gone on he has his absolute favourite thing to do is to go to the library and to get books on dinosaurs out. And now he did fulfil that early promise. Music is another area that we often see very well-developed talents. People who can play by ear, hearing the piece of music once, that sort of thing. Calendrical calculation is a really interesting one, and this is where people are able to tell you the day that a particular date falls on. If you give them a date, they can tell you what day of the week it was, and can do that so faster than mathematicians from Oxford and Cambridge could calculate it. One young man who was able to do that faster than mathematicians could do it on a calculator. And mathematical calculation is another area. So these are the sort of common areas that we find these very exceptional, well-developed skills and abilities. Here are some of the people that you might hear about. It's always fascinating you can have a look at Google them, they'll come up with all sorts of things. Kim Peake, whose picture is up the top right there, he was the man that Rain Man was based on. He had some extraordinary abilities. He was hyperlexic. He could read a book in an hour, and what's more, he could remember every single word on every single page. And it was estimated that he had memorised 12,000 books. So he had extraordinary skills. Stephen Wiltshire, I mentioned, he's up at the top left there. Stephen Wiltshire has been to Brisbane. Has anybody seen some of the things that he's done? Yes, he's done the Brisbane River. That's him actually drawing the Brisbane River. Now, he has extraordinary artistic abilities. His nickname is Shutter, because he just typically he can be flown over a city like London in a helicopter once, and then he can just draw the whole city in this absolutely accurate, perfect detail. Extraordinary ability. Daniel Tammet is somebody with extraordinary mathematical abilities. Particularly one of his fascinations in life is pi, and he can calculate pi to I can't remember how many thousand places, but he has done that out loud. And he also has a facility with languages, and was challenged to learn Icelandic, which he did in a week. And a week after starting learning Icelandic, he was being interviewed on Icelandic television in Icelandic quite capably. So extraordinary abilities. And Rex Lewis Clack is a young man with exceptional musical abilities who can play by ear, just hearing something once. So very interesting, but as I did say, only a small, very small proportion of the population, the autistic population, have these extraordinary savant skills. And I think most importantly, what we need to do is to look at the relative strengths and abilities that many people with autism have. People like this are fascinating, and they tell us a lot about, the way the human brain works and how extraordinary it is. But we need to really focus on the skills and abilities that the majority of people with autism have. That certainly won't be at this extraordinary level. So I want to tell you a little bit about a young man called Patrick, who I've worked with in the past. And Patrick was a really good example of the sort of student that we had in the schools where I worked in New South Wales, who was diagnosed with severe autism and intellectual disability. He didn't speak at all until he was 5, nearly 6. But he had a fascination with numbers and with letters too. In fact, when he started to talk, sometimes he would spell the words out loud rather than say the words. So he also showed a facility for learning words and spelling words in Latin and Italian as well. But he had extraordinary mathematical abilities. He was a calendar calculator, and when he met people, he would quite often, if he'd met them before, he used to make a point of finding out birthdays and dates, and he'd remember your car registration number. So, he would say, if I came into the school, for example, it was Jackie Roberts, and I'd get my birth date, broadcast to everybody. Never fussed about that, but some people didn't like it. And my car registration number. And of course, if you changed your car, that would really throw him. So we'd have to go out into the car park and have a look at the car, see that this is my car, and I had another car with another registration. But then, of course, he'd remember the new one. So, but Patrick had a lot of frustrations, communicative frustrations. He had a lot of difficulty understanding what people said to him. He used to get very, very anxious. Again, as Megan said, anxiety is so common with our guys, and when he was anxious, he used to get he'd get a lot of behaviour issues would arise. So he'd either internalise those, so we'd get self-injurious behaviour, he'd bite himself, or he would lash out and hit other people. And it was usually associated with change, because he had great difficulty dealing with change, and it was hard to explain it to him. He was much better if you showed him what changes were going to occur. And he also used to find it very frustrating, of course, when people couldn't understand what he found it very difficult to express himself as well as to understand what other people had. So we had the two, those two main triggers for his behaviour problems. But fortunately, the school he was in were very much able to look at the things that Patrick could do really well, and were able to develop those. So whereas he has now graduated from school, he's not able to hold down a job, but he has very well developed leisure and rec skills. His passion in life now is trains, and he knows train timetables for every state in Australia. He is also able, although he really can't communicate verbally, he is also able to plan and to go on train trips. He gets himself around on trains, and that's the thing that he really likes to do the most. And when he's on a train, he's calm and happy, and he does a lot of that now independently, which is pretty amazing. It's something that we never really expected to see. So, Patrick is not an atypical example of the sort of young people that we work with and see, and that I've certainly known in the past. So, just thinking about the population of Patrick was enrolled in one of the autistic schools in New South Wales run by Aspect, which he's now graduated from. So what we did was, we're in this project we're working with Autism Spectrum Australia, and working particularly with Trevor Clark, Dr. Trevor Clark, who's also an adjunct with us at Griffith. And Trevor did his PhD on exceptional skills and abilities, and also on developing ways that we can develop and channel those. So if you like, a savant curriculum, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. So this is what we want to build on, and the first thing that we thought was necessary was to actually look at a population of young people with autism, and to look at these were basically aged between 8 and 18 years of age, and to look, 6 and 18, to look at the sort of skills and abilities that they had. So we developed a survey which we had 100 parents, or nearly 99 parents completed, which was a fairly good return rate across. There were 3 schools involved, and the online questionnaire was really designed to determine the nature and the extent of those exceptional skills and abilities. So what sort of exceptional skills and abilities there were, and how common was it. So we looked at that. We developed a survey to do that. We also looked at social abilities and behaviours. We incorporated the social responsiveness scale in the assessment, and we used file review to check cognitive ability. All of the children had cognitive assessment, and all of them had a diagnosis of autism verified for school entry by the psychological team there. Now, so what we found was that, and we also, I forgot to say, we surveyed the parents. We also surveyed the child's teacher for each child, and for a number of students we've done an in-depth interview with them as well, with the child. So we're trying to get that student, parent and teacher voice. We also validated the parent responses with an interview. So we took the questions from the ADIR, which is an autism diagnosis assessment, that particularly relate to exceptional skills and abilities, and the psychologist on the team contacted all the families and went through those questions with them as a way of validating what they had responded on the survey. So what did we find? We found that of those nearly 100 parents, 42% reported exceptional skills and abilities in their child. So of those, 13 were savant skills. Now remember, those are skills that are exceptional for anybody, way above what you would expect in the typical population. 21 reported relative strengths. 36 were described as gifted. Now that was defined by children who had IQ and a superior level IQ, and also a diagnosis of autism. And we had 76 teacher reports for those students. Now what we found was poor agreement between the teacher and the parent reports. So what the parents were seeing, the teachers weren't necessarily seeing. So this was important information, I think, for us, because this is what we need to do some work now to look at really clearly defining these in a measurable way, what these skills and abilities are, and then looking at we found with the validation process that the parents the validation process agreed with the parents pretty well. So the parents were the ones who were picking up the child's special skills and abilities. The teachers, with the teachers, it was very poor. So that's interesting, because it means that it's possible. These are teachers that are working in schools for kids with autism, and you really would have expected that result was surprising to us. So it just shows that it's probably quite a lot of work that we need to do there. What sort of skills did did we find? What sort of skills were reported? So interestingly enough, and I did mention memory, and memory was at a savant level for quite a big group of the kids. So, and that was, as I mentioned, episodic memory, memory for past events and people, places and occasions. It was also a relative strength that was identified by parents as well. So we've got for some it was exceptional, and for some it was a relative strength. The other one that came through quite strongly is reading. So we have some who had exceptional reading abilities, and decoding, and then also quite a few there for whom it was a relative strength. So this is really, as I said, this is work that we'll be looking at writing up, and we have to examine the data a lot more closely. It's very preliminary at this stage, but nonetheless very interesting. So this is the beginning really of identifying those strengths and abilities and developing a process that we can use to assess them. The next challenge, of course, is what do we do? How do we develop and facilitate those skills and abilities? Just aware of, in fact, I'm just going over time a little bit here, but we've not got a lot to. Okay, so clearly this is the challenge for us, is to how to identify those skills and abilities, because as I said, they are often overlooked, and maybe it may be that we're not providing the right sort of adjustments and adaptations at school, for example, that are going to help facilitate them. Why do we want to differentiate the curriculum? Because it's important that we really do look at the future for these students and ways that we can equip them better to have a more successful life, vocationally, leisure and recreation. So, strengths in education and post-school employment. So these certainly included autistic strengths in educational programs for leisure employment. As I mentioned, across the board we can look at ways that we can develop those, because that's going to improve quality of life. And also too, and I think Megan touched on this earlier, autistic interests and passions are highly motivating for people with autism as well. So it's a really, it's not only going to build the child's self-esteem, but it's going to engage them more and enable them to participate better. Now, when we look at the curriculum for twice exceptional students, and we find that there's really very little that we know about the way to manage those in school. We know generally that it's important to build on strengths and to support areas of special need. But, we really do have a long way to go. It's important that we think about how we can, use strengths and abilities to assist learning, to, have a functional application, and also to have a social application. It's great for children to have something they know they're good at, that they can really talk to their, they can also be known by their peers as something they're good at. Now, I'm just going to, because I know we're running out of time, but I just want to touch briefly with you on a model that we've been looking at to develop this curriculum approach to developing special skills and abilities. Now, this looks really complicated, I know, and I don't expect you to, but I'll just summarise briefly. So we've got, on this side, we've got the skills and abilities of people with autism that we might see, and these are the things that we've just talked about. So we've got strengths, we've got the savant skills, and we've got the twice exceptional there. So again, it's those areas that we've talked about. And then we've also got, with the twice exceptional, we've got, of course, the disability, the characteristics of autism there that we are thinking increasingly about in terms of difference rather than disability. And then we've got the educational program in place there, which is focusing very much on identifying the skills and abilities and looking at ways that, so we've got various ways of identifying there, and then to develop an education plan that really looks at how we can use those to develop the students. And then we have quality of life here on the far side, which is what we're aiming for, that improved quality of life as a result. So just to almost finish on some words from Yen Perkis. This was Jennifer Perkis, but she's now changed her name. And she points out that how important it is to really look at the powerful interests of people with autism, because how important that is in the sense of motivating people. So she does point out that many autistic academics and professionals have made a career pursuing their passion. Sometimes people say that universities are sheltered workshops for people with autism. I might vouch for that. And just to finish up with Tim Sharp's painting of a double shot of happiness. And we'll just try and see if this. Just the last word, I think, should be from Tim.
My name is Tim Sharp. I'm an artist. I'm from Brisbane. This is my artwork.
And I'm Jenny Sharp, and I'm Tim Sharp's mum. Tim was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, and I was told that he would never speak. So I was desperate to communicate with my son, and one day, in desperation, I sat down and started to draw for him.
I have a lot of ideas in my head. I made these big when I was 11 years old.
Laser Big Bang gives us a really big insight into Tim's mind and what goes on in his head. Autism isn't actually always classed as a mental health diagnosis, but there are some associated depression and anxiety which can be very, very severe, that do require a lot of mental health assistance, and particularly for adults with autism, they're very much a forgotten group. We are really, really passionate about bringing attention to a lot of forgotten people with autism that are in isolated situations without fulfillment in their life, suffering with anxiety and depression. His artwork gives an insight into the possibilities of what's inside someone's mind. So we're hoping that it inspires people and shows the joy that is really inside minds. I think he's a genius.
Yes, I am a genius. That's the one.